The wagon wheel caught on a rut outside the trading post, and Josephine Hargrove nearly lost her grip on the seat. Her mother didn't reach for her, didn't even turn. "Sit still," was all Bettina Hargrove said, eyes fixed on the storefront ahead, jaw set like she'd already decided something, and was only waiting on the paperwork. Josie was 17, thin in the wrists, with a burn scar along her left forearm from a stove accident 3 winters back. She kept that arm tucked into her sleeve out of habit. Her hair was the color of wheat stubble, cropped short by her own hand, because long hair got in the way of hauling water, and there was no one in that house who'd have noticed if she'd let it grow. The trading post belonged to Otis Reyes, a barrel-shaped man, with a ledger he guarded like scripture. Bettina climbed down from the wagon and walked straight to him, not looking back to see if Josie followed. "I heard Cade's looking for help out at his place," Bettina said. "Someone to keep house." "Cook." Otis raised an eyebrow. "Cade don't hire out, does his own. He'll take her." Bettina's voice didn't waver. "She's strong, don't eat much, and she's not particular." Josie stood a few feet off, hands folded, watching her mother describe her like livestock at auction. She'd heard worse said about her at home. Useless, another mouth, more trouble than she's worth. But hearing it spoken plain to a stranger, in daylight, with the sun warm on her shoulders, and doves calling somewhere behind the feed store, landed different. She wanted a home. She wanted, more than anything, somewhere she wasn't in the way. But nobody had ever built a life around what she wanted. She was 17, and she'd learned that early, the way some children learn to read early, or to run. "She's not for hire," Otis said slowly. "She's kin." "You're talking like—" "I know what I'm talking like." Bettina's hands were flat on the counter now. "There's 6 of us in that house, and 1 of her, and she costs more than she brings in. Cade's got money. He's got land. He needs someone who won't complain about the work." A long quiet stretched between them. Somewhere out back, a horse shifted its weight against a fence rail, the wood groaning. "You're asking me to sell your daughter," Otis said. "I'm asking you to help her," Bettina snapped. "There's a difference, if you'd think on it." Josie didn't correct anyone. She'd learned that too, that correcting her mother only made the silence after last longer and colder. Thomas Cade came into town 2 days later, for feed and nails, the way he did most weeks, and found Otis waiting for him at the counter, with something on his mind he clearly hadn't wanted to say over the ledger. "Got an offer for you," Otis said. "Might be nothing. Might be something you don't want." Thomas was 34, broad through the shoulders, from 12 years of working his own land alone, with a quiet way of listening that made people either trust him fast or find him strange. He wore his hat low, and there was a stillness to him. Not coldness, but the kind of stillness a man gets from long stretches, without another voice in the house. "Say it plain," Thomas said. Otis told him. The mother. The girl standing outside right now, waiting on the porch, because Bettina had told her to wait there and not come in. Thomas looked out the window. Josie stood at the porch rail with her chin up and her eyes down, the posture of someone bracing without appearing to brace. Her dress was patched at the hem. Her boots were a size too big, laced tight to make up the difference. "She know what her mother's asking?" Thomas said. "I expect she does." Thomas was quiet a long moment. He'd buried a wife 4 years back, fever, gone in 11 days, and the house since then had the particular silence of a place built for 2 people and occupied by 1. He didn't need help. He managed fine. But there was something in the set of that girl's shoulders through the glass that pulled at a part of him he didn't examine too closely. "I'll talk to her," he said. "Not her mother, her." He went out onto the porch. Josie flinched at the sound of the door, then caught herself and stood straighter. Like flinching was a mistake, she could still walk back. "You're Josephine," Thomas said. "Josie." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Yes, sir. Your mother's in there, telling Otis. I ought to take you on. cooking, keeping house. He studied her, not unkindly, but plain, the way a man studies weather, before deciding whether to ride out in it. That's something you want, or something you're being told to want? The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked her that before. Not in those words. Not ever. "I don't know what I want," she said finally. "I know I can work. I know I'm not particular." The word came out bitter, an echo of her mother's, and she saw something shift behind Thomas's eyes when he caught it too. "That's not what I asked." Josie looked at him then, really looked. The sun-worn face, the patience in it, the way he waited for her answer, instead of filling the silence himself. "I want somewhere I'm not counted against," she said. "That's all." Thomas nodded slowly, like she'd said something worth the weight he gave it. "Get your things," he said. "What you have of them." "That's it? You're not going to—" She stopped herself. "Going to what?" "Ask my mother what's wrong with me. Why she's giving me away." Something tightened in his jaw. "I don't figure there's anything wrong with you a mother needed telling me about." He turned toward the wagon. "Get your things, Josie. We'll ride out before dark." Bettina came out of the trading post in time to see Josie climbing up onto Thomas Cade's wagon seat, a single cloth bundle in her lap, the whole of what she owned in the world. "You'll send word she's settled," Bettina said to Thomas, businesslike, already turning back toward her own wagon. Thomas didn't answer right away. He looked at Josie's mother for a long moment, the kind of look that made grown men shift their feet, though Bettina held it without flinching. "I'll treat her the way she deserves," he said finally. "That's the only word I'll give you." Bettina's mouth pressed into something that wasn't quite a frown. Whatever she felt at that, relief, shame, nothing at all, she didn't let it show. She climbed into her wagon and rode off toward home, without looking back a second time. Josie watched her mother's wagon shrink into the distance, dust rising gold in the late sun, and felt something twist low in her chest that she didn't have a name for. Not grief, exactly. Not relief, either. Something in between, unfinished. The way a held breath feels before it's let go. Thomas snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, wheels finding the rutted road out of town. "You don't have to talk if you don't want," he said, eyes on the horizon. "But you don't have to stay quiet either. Not in my house." Josie didn't answer. She wasn't sure yet what silence in his house would feel like, whether it would sit on her chest the way it had in her mother's, or whether, for the first time, it might simply be quiet. They rode on, the sun dropping gold and low behind the hills, and somewhere out past the last fence line, a hawk cut slow circles against the sky, like it was waiting to see how the story went. The Cade homestead sat back from the road behind a stand of cottonwoods, a modest house with a porch that wrapped halfway around, a barn beyond it weathered silver gray. Smoke curled thin from the chimney of a house that hadn't had a woman's hand in it for 4 years. Thomas pulled the wagon up short and set the brake. "This is it," he said. "Not much to look at." Josie climbed down before he could offer a hand, an old habit. She'd learned young that waiting on help from anyone cost more than it was worth. She stood with her bundle against her chest, taking in the barn, the fenced pasture beyond, 3 horses grazing loose and unbothered. "It's more than I had," she said quietly. Thomas didn't answer that. He carried her bundle inside himself, which she hadn't expected, and set it on a chair in the front room, like it was something worth handling with care. The house was plain, but clean. A man's version of clean. Everything squared away out of necessity, rather than pride. A woman's shawl still hung on a peg by the door. Josie noticed it and looked away fast, like she'd caught sight of something private. "That was Margaret's," Thomas said, following her eyes. "My wife. She's been gone 4 years. I don't keep it there to trouble you. I just never got around to moving it." "I don't mind it," Josie said, and meant it. There was something steadying in knowing the house had held love before, that it wasn't only walls and work, rooms through there. He nodded toward a door off the kitchen. It was hers before it was anyone's. You'll have it now." Josie stood very still. "You're giving me a room. Where'd you think you'd sleep?" She didn't answer that either, because the true answer, a corner, a loft, wherever there was space left after everyone else had claimed the good ground, felt too small to say out loud in a house like this. The first week, Josie worked like she expected to be tested. She was up before Thomas, coffee on the stove, biscuits shaped and rising, before he came in from the barn. She scrubbed the floors twice, when once would have done. She mended a shirt of his without being asked, sitting up past dark by lamplight, fingers cramping around the needle, because idle hands had never once been safe in her mother's house. Thomas noticed. He said nothing for 3 days, watching her the way he watched weather building on the horizon, patient, unhurried, waiting to see what it would do. On the 4th morning, he found her already at the stove when he came in, dark circles under her eyes. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Enough, Josie." He said her name plain, no edge to it. "I didn't bring you here to work yourself sick. Then why did you bring me here?" The question came out sharper than she meant, and she braced immediately. The old reflex. Brace for the hand, the raised voice. The door slammed in her face. Instead, Thomas just set his hat on the peg and pulled out a chair at the table, slow and unbothered. "Sit down a minute," he said. She sat, back straight, waiting. "Where I grew up," he said, "my father worked my mother into the ground, sun up to sundown, no rest, like rest was something she hadn't earned. She died young, worn through, the doctor said, though he didn't put it that plain." He turned his coffee cup a half-turn on the table, not drinking from it. "I told myself if I ever had a house of my own, nobody in it would live like that. Not my wife, not you." Josie looked down at her hands, red and cracked from lye soap and scrub water. "I don't know how to be in a house where nobody's counting what I owe," she said. "Nobody's counting," Thomas said. "Eat your breakfast. Then if you want work, I'll take help mending fence. But it's not a debt, Josie. It's just a Tuesday." She almost smiled. Almost. Word traveled fast in a county that small, and by the 2nd week, half the town had an opinion about the girl living out at the Cade place. Josie felt it the first time she went into town for supplies, the way conversations dipped low when she passed, the way Delia Marsh, who ran the dry goods store, watched her a beat too long before ringing up the flour and thread. "You're the Hargrove girl," Delia said, not unkind, just certain. "Josie," she said. Delia wrapped the goods slow. "Folks are saying your mother traded you off for a sack of flour and a length of rope. That true?" The words landed like a slap, plain and public, said in the same tone a person might use to discuss the weather. Josie's face went hot. "It wasn't like that," she said, though she wasn't sure what it had been like. Only that hearing it, summarized so small, made something in her chest cave inward. "Didn't say it was," Delia said, not unkindly, but not taking it back either. "Just what folks are saying." Josie carried her purchases out to the wagon with her jaw tight, blinking hard against the sting behind her eyes, and didn't cry until she was 3 miles down the road and certain no one could see. Thomas found out about the town talk from Otis 2 days later, and rode into town with a stillness about him that made even Otis choose his words careful. "She hear that from Delia?" Thomas asked. "I expect so. Folks talk, Thomas. Can't put a fence around it." "No," Thomas agreed. "But I can decide what she hears from me." He didn't confront Delia. That wasn't his way. Instead, he went home and found Josie out back, hanging wash on the line, her movements quick and efficient, the kind of busy a person uses to keep from thinking. "Heard what was said in town," he said. Josie's hands stilled on the line, a wet shirt caught between her fingers. "I don't need you fighting my battles." Wasn't going to fight anybody. He leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, watching her the way he always did, patient, unhurried. "Just wanted you to hear it plain from me, since you heard it ugly from someone else. Whatever you were traded for, or weren't. It doesn't change what you are in this house. You understand that? And what am I in this house? The words came out before she could soften them, raw and a little desperate, like she'd been holding the question a long time, and it had finally worn through. Thomas was quiet a moment, choosing his answer with the same care he'd choose a horse or a piece of land. Something meant to last. Someone who belongs here, he said. That's all. That's the whole of it. Josie turned back to the wash line so he wouldn't see her face crumple, hanging a shirt with hands that weren't quite steady. Behind her, Thomas didn't leave. He picked up a basket of wet clothes and started hanging them beside her, wordless, the two of them working the line together in a silence that, for the first time since she'd arrived, didn't feel like something she had to survive. That night, over supper, Thomas set down his fork and looked at her, steady across the table. "I've got a proposal," he said. "Not asking you to answer tonight. Just want you thinking on it." Josie's stomach tightened, old instincts rising fast, bracing for a catch, a cost, the moment the kindness turned out to have a price after all. "What kind of proposal?" "There's talk in town," Thomas said, "about you being here, unmarried, in a widower's house. Doesn't matter to me what folks say, but it might matter to you, going forward. Might make things harder than they need to be. You're saying I should leave. I'm saying the opposite." Thomas held her eyes, steady as ever. "I'm saying you could stay here as my wife, instead of my hired help. Not because of what folks think. Because I've watched you 4 weeks now, and I don't want you gone." Josie sat frozen, fork halfway to her mouth, the words landing somewhere she didn't have language for yet. "You don't have to answer tonight," Thomas said again, quieter now. "Take your time. Take a month if you need it. I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the wind picked up against the shutters, and somewhere past the barn, a coyote called once, long and lonesome, into the dark. Josie didn't answer that night, or the next. She carried the question with her through the days that followed, out to the hen house, into town for supplies, through long stretches of silence at the washboard, turning it over, like a stone worn smooth from handling. Thomas didn't press her. He went about his work same as always, mending fence, tending stock, and if the waiting cost him anything, he didn't let it show. It was Otis, of all people, who tipped the scale. She'd come into the trading post for thread, and Otis leaned across the counter, with the particular carefulness of a man about to say something he'd been chewing on. 4 years I've known Thomas Cade," he said, "since before Margaret passed. I watched that man go quiet as a shut door after she died. Didn't laugh, didn't linger in town longer than business required. He nodded toward the window, toward the road that led out to the Cade place. Man's talking again, asking after folks' families. Told a joke to Delia Marsh last week, if you can believe it." Josie said nothing, but her hands had gone still on the counter. "I'm not telling you what to do," Otis said. "Just telling you what I've seen. Whatever he's asking you for, I don't think it's out of pity. I think it's the first thing that man's wanted for himself in a long while." She found Thomas in the barn that evening, forking hay into the stalls, sleeves rolled to the elbow, unaware she was watching from the doorway. "I've been thinking on your proposal," she said. He set the fork down slow, giving her his full attention the way he always did. Like whatever she had to say mattered more than anything else the day could offer. "I never had anyone ask me what I wanted before," Josie said. "Not once. Not my mother. Not anybody. You did. First day you met me, standing on that porch, you asked me what I wanted, and I didn't even know how to answer, because nobody'd built me to have an answer ready." Her voice wavered, but she kept on. "I don't know if I love you yet. I know I'm not scared in this house. I know 4 weeks here, and I still wake up expecting it to be a mistake, and it never is. That has to count for something. It counts for everything," Thomas said quietly. "Then yes," Josie said, "if you're still asking. Yes." Something in Thomas's face loosened, a tightness she hadn't fully realized he carried, until she saw it go. He crossed the barn floor, and stopped in front of her, close but careful, like she was something he intended to handle, with the same steadiness he gave everything else that mattered to him. "I'll spend a long while making sure you never regret that word," he said. "I believe you," Josie said, and found, to her own surprise, that she did. They married 3 weeks later, on a bright morning with the cottonwoods just starting to turn, in front of the small church in town. Otis stood as witness, grinning wide enough to embarrass himself. Delia Marsh came too, and pressed Josie's hand after the ceremony, with something that looked almost like apology in her eyes. "Wasn't my place to say what I said before," Delia told her, glad to be wrong about how this was going. Josie's mother did not come. Word had reached her. Otis had seen to that, but no reply ever arrived. No letter, no wagon on the road. Josie had thought she might grieve that absence, sharp and sudden on her wedding day. Instead, she found the ache had dulled to something distant, a door she no longer needed open. Thomas noticed her looking down the empty road as they left the church. "You waiting on someone?" he asked gently. "No," Josie said, and found it was true. Not anymore. The seasons turned. The house that had held silence for 4 years, filled instead with the ordinary noise of a life shared. Boots at the door, voices over supper, Josie's laugh, rare at first, and then less rare, ringing out across the yard, while she chased a hen that had gotten loose from the coop. Thomas built her a proper garden come spring, turned the soil himself before she'd even asked, and stood back grinning like a boy when she found it. "Didn't have to do that," she said, kneeling in the dark earth, fingers already itching to plant something of her own. "Wanted to," he said. "There's a difference, if you'd think on it." And Josie laughed outright, recognizing her own mother's words turned soft and harmless in his mouth, stripped of every thorn they'd once carried. By the second winter, she was carrying a child, and Thomas took to fussing over her in a way that made her swat him off with mock irritation, even as something warm settled permanent behind her ribs. He built a cradle himself in the evenings, out in the barn by lamplight, sanding the wood smooth as glass. "Your mother's work-worn hands built that stove I first stood at," Josie told him one night, watching him work. "Now yours are building this." Thomas looked up at her, unhurried as ever. "Different kind of house," he said. "Different kind of hands." The baby came in early spring, a girl, loud-voiced and healthy, and Thomas held her that first night with the same careful steadiness he'd once used to carry a stranger's bundle into his home, like something precious, handled with intention. "What'll we call her?" he asked, voice rough, with something he didn't bother naming. Josie looked at her daughter's small, furious face and thought of a porch in town, a question nobody had ever asked her before, and a man who'd waited patient as weather for her answer. "Margaret," she said softly, "after the woman who kept this house before me. Seems only right she's part of it too." Thomas's throat worked once before he answered. "She'd have liked you," he said. "I know that for certain." Outside, the last of the winter frost was giving way to green along the fence line, and the horses grazed easy in the near pasture, and the house that had once stood so quiet now held 3 heartbeats, where there'd only ever been one. Josie leaned into Thomas's shoulder, her daughter's small hand curled around her finger, and understood at last what it meant to be somewhere she wasn't counted against, only counted in.